How did Bolivia escape rampant global inflation? And why is biodiversity critical to the survival of our planet? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and we will examine these issues in depth on a special edition of The Heat. The fight against climate change is front and center at this year's United Nations General Assembly. World leaders are sounding the alarm as we experience devastating floods, droughts, and heat. Another critical component in this fight is biodiversity. Scientists say the delicate balance of species that propagates life on Earth is seriously threatened. From coastal reefs to the Amazon rainforest, billions of life forms are now extinct, endangering future generations. I spoke with Elizabeth Maruma Mrema. She is the UN's Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. But first, to some economic lessons from Bolivia. My colleague Elaine Reyes spoke with Bolivian President Luis Arce about some of the pressing issues facing his country and what he expects at this year's UN General Assembly.
Well, as many countries, we are worried about what's happening in all the world. We bring our small experience, how we are managing the inflation and how we are facing the other problems. And of course, we would like to share all of them with the world, especially all of them about Mother Earth, which is very important for us, and also many other topics that we are sure that discussion with open mind discussions here in the Assembly, we can find solutions for all the problems that the world is facing so far.
You mentioned inflation. That is such a huge problem everywhere you look around the world, but your country hasn't really been impacted by that quite so much. You do have a background as an economist. So what is your secret? What is being done? What are you doing to keep the inflation rate manageable and lower than what we're seeing everywhere else?
Well, in one word is we have our own economic model behind. We have already finished the neoliberalist model in 2006 and put in place our own model, our own economic model, which is completely different. We don't believe in the market instruments. We believe in the state taking into account the economy, being the leader in the economy. For instance, when we nationalized hydrocarbons in 2006 and so on, everybody criticizes. They say that they're not happy with what we are doing. They were not happy that the state was intervening in the economy. But so far, you know, we are shown all the world that we were right. The exchange rate, for example, is one of the key issues for us. The state, you know, fixing some prices, strategic prices for people, it's very important. Of course, that it means subsidies and so on, but the state has to do it even more in a world where we have a war in the world that is affecting many economic variables. So it's important that the state has to intervene in the economy very strongly, because for the economists, we all know that is supposedly this war will be lasting, let's say, 1 year, 2 years. It's short run. So intervening, fiscal deficit and other things will be, of course, also in the short run only. Therefore, people doesn't have to you know, worry about the long term, because it is, we are talking about the short run. In the short run, many things can happen, and if you don't take into account policies, economic policies, in order to avoid these kind of factors, you will have the inflation you have now, the exchange rate moving, the prices, the strategic prices commodities and so on going up, and many things that happen. And many countries that are only, based on market instruments and market conditions, they are not going to follow good results as we are looking so far. Even more, in many countries that are rising rates, interest rates, just to fight the inflation, afterwards they will face recessions, and the results will be very, very most dangerous than the measures they are taking today. So Bolivia, we did completely different things. We are improving, we're enhancing the production, food production. We would like to produce all the food we consume, and also we are industrializing. We are in a process where we are industrializing all our national resources, but also other things that Bolivia used to import. So we call it the import substitutions policy, and we are succeeding with that. We are producing now, so that's why we are less dependent from import goods, and that's why when there is inflation all over the world, we only worry about the oil prices, but because we import oil, we produce gas, but we don't produce oil. So we are also introducing a new plant for producing oil, how you call this, the diesel, natural diesel, from plants, you can produce it, and that's the way we are doing, trying to substitute imports, producing them with our own resources. So our policy of substituting imports from all the products we are importing, that's the way we are facing the import inflation that are facing many countries. And also, when you improve the production, when you substitute imports with your own production, you face less inflation.
So, Mr. President, does your model, can it be replicated by other countries of a similar size or other developing countries? Does it work because of the size of your country?
Of course it can be used in many countries, either if they have natural resources or not, because when you talk about import substitution, you look the potentialities you have into your countries that can substitute your imports, first of all. Second, you improve the production, and then you have better income for the country, and you have to redistribute. That's the key issue for our model, is not only to the production, the import substitution, but also it's very important that with all the economic excellence you have in the economy, you redistribute it among people. And that's the way, we are solving our problem. We are reducing poverty, we are reducing the inequalities, which is very, very important. Many economists, they are not looking at the inequalities in the society, and one of the things that we have to solve in these years is the inequality, and the income redistribution in Bolivia is helping us to reduce the inequality, and reducing inequality, more and better redistribution, income redistribution, with more in production. That's the recipe for everybody, I think.
You can watch the full interview with Bolivian President Luis Arce on America's Now, Sunday at 6 p.m. Washington time. That's 6 a.m. Monday, Beijing time. Next, my interview with the UN's Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Elizabeth Maruma Mrema.
2024, only on CGTN. 360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. Biz Talk, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. On this special edition of The Heat, we turn now to biodiversity. Just how important is it to save all life forms for the future of our planet? Earlier, I spoke with Elizabeth Maruma Mrema. She is the UN's Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and I began by asking her the challenges that species around the world are facing.
Biodiversity loss has reached unprecedented rates, as the scientists have clearly told us. Over 1 million species are feared going to extinction just within this century. And the species is both animals, plants, insects. If you look at land degradation, over 75% of the land is already degraded. 66% of the marine environment is degraded. 85% of the wetlands is also degraded. So basically, entire biodiversity ecosystem is not in good shape. And yet, economists, the World Economic Forum, for instance, tells us that 50% of the global GDP comes from nature and the ecosystems it provides. Exactly $44 trillion. And about $10 trillion will be accrued per year as the result of activities on nature. And we hope also that those activities include shifting away from nature negative to nature positive activities. And also the economists are telling us over 350 million jobs will be accrued from nature by 2030. So there's economic sense, there's business case there. The scientists have also reminded us and told us this is our last chance to make a difference. We still have time to take action. And we hope moving forward, really actions by all stakeholders are considered and being taken to change, to move away from the loss of biodiversity and halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity. But more important is also the connection between loss of biodiversity and climate change. We know there's a lot of talk on climate change and actions or climate actions to change the situation, to be able to reach the 1.5 degrees pre-industrial level. But we also know that climate change solutions on their own will not solve the problem without looking at also the nature biodiversity solutions. Not surprising that the climate community are looking at nature-based solutions as solutions to climate change. And we've been told that 37% of the climate mitigation and adaptation will come from biodiversity, or that is virtually a third of greenhouse gas emissions will be dependent on biodiversity. So again, biodiversity provides solutions to climate change, and that's why it is important to make the connection between the two issues. Climate change and biodiversity loss are intrinsically interconnected.
Right.
And therefore solutions need to be looked at in an integrated manner.
So should there be much more of a comprehensive look at these issues going forward, rather than the way it's being looked at right now as separate issues?
Perfect, yes. We need to look at an integrated approach to both, and it's not just climate change and biodiversity. The world, the planet is now facing what we call planetary crisis, or literally reaching the tipping points. And we are looking at climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, pollution. I mean, biodiversity, when you look at agriculture, livestock production, and the chemicals used in the process, the pesticides used in the process, and the pollution as the result. All these are primary drivers of biodiversity loss. So it's climate change, it's land use and sea use, overexploitation of natural resources, pollution, invasive alien species. These are primary drivers. And therefore, it is important to look at them in an integrated way. And climate change being one of them as the primary driver. And that's why my earlier point, connection between the planetary crisis.
Do you think more can be done to make people more aware of the consequences of not addressing these issues that we're talking about?
Yes, indeed. And this is where part of the challenge we are facing, that the awareness and particularly on the connection and the importance of the two issues, climate change and biodiversity, has not been adequate. The world, or probably the climate community, had been ahead of biodiversity community. And probably when it was ahead, we were all focused on climate, not knowing that the impacts on climate change are actually as the result of the impact on biodiversity. Now that we know, we need to increase this awareness that one cannot be dealt with without the other. So I think the challenge now is among us all to create that awareness and make the connection that each is dependent on the other. And therefore, we should not look at only climate, but we should also look at the other. And I will give another example. I have the privilege to be one of the co-chair of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. And again, this task force has been established over 5 years after another task force on climate-related financial disclosure. So again, you see, climate was ahead of the game. They have had already a set of recommendations to deal with the climate-related financial disclosure. Nature, biodiversity came later. It's trying to catch up. But of course, in terms of catching up has been the ability to build on the work done already by the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure and bring the angle, the nature biodiversity angle, through the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which is currently developing a framework on risk and impact management, as well as looking at the dependencies and opportunities that nature provides to corporate bodies and financial institutions. And we hope that this is part of the learning curve and catching up, but then not adding a new dimension, but building on climate, again, to show the connection and the linkages between the two issues.
What can you tell us about the post-2020 biodiversity framework?
Great question. As we speak, 196 parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity for the last 4 years have been in the process of developing a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. This framework will actually replace the strategic biodiversity plan as well as the Aichi biodiversity targets, which were adopted in 2010 and would have ended 2020, but because of COVID, now we are talking of 12 years. Unfortunately, after 10 years, looking at how globally we have done, none of the 20 Aichi targets were met. And of course, the figures, the statistics have already demonstrated in terms of the magnitude of biodiversity loss of the species, degradation of sea, of land, of wetlands, extinction of species, clearly indicate we have not done much. But the scientists have also told us it is not too late to reverse and halt the loss of biodiversity. And this is what now governments are dealing with, learning the lessons from the Aichi biodiversity target to develop a new pathway to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. So what will be in the post-2020 framework? currently is a draft of 4 long-term goals leading us to 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, and with about 21 action-oriented targets, measurable targets, which could be measured and assessed by 2030 how we are faring. However, a lot still needs to be done before the Conference of the Parties, which will finalize and adopt that framework, because the draft framework is still shrouded or decorated with over 1,820 brackets. And we have less than 3 months for the governments to reduce these brackets to manageable size, if not of all, before the draft could be presented to the global ministers to actually now review and have it adopted. So we hope that this framework, which has targets specifically for climate change, has targets specifically for pollution, chemicals, pesticides, targets on marine environment, the landscapes, freshwater, species, and that's why we're even calling it is a framework for all of government, all of society in that integrated approach, hands on deck, and it will be universal for everybody, not just governments, but business, youth, women, indigenous peoples and local communities, NGOs, everybody, because again, through it, to also provide actions and solutions for other environmental challenges the world is facing.
Right, and looking at one of the other specific challenges, and I mentioned this earlier, rapid urbanization. More and more people are moving to cities. We've seen this trend for quite some time, and I'm wondering how big a challenge does that pose for sustainability, and what would you like to see in terms of future city planning to accommodate this influx of people in a sustainable way?
Thank you. There is a reason why we see an increasing population to urban centers. When opportunities are less in the rural areas, the tendency is people moving, looking for greener pastures in the cities. So in terms of sustainability, is actually looking at, again, sustainability in the rural areas as is also in the urban areas. Delighted we see that cities, local authorities, subnational governments are taking actions to actually create green urban centers. But you see, green urban centers will provide an avenue for the city dwellers to be able to have green spaces to live in, to create that health, well-being, as well as the planet. But it does not mean that it will reduce the movement and migration of people from rural areas to the urban areas. So the developments taking place in the urban centers, not only that they need to be sustainable, but that sustainability and opportunities need also to take place in the rural areas, so that then people remain there and they see opportunities there and they see development there. Then, of course, we reduce the pressure in the urban centers and enable then the local authorities to develop the green urban cities, the green infrastructure in the urban centers in a sustainable way. And reduce then that pressure in the urban areas.
All right, now the COP15 summit will take place in Canada, not China. That's because of China's zero COVID policy, but China still holds the presidency of that summit. What can you tell us about China's leadership in promoting sustainability and preserving the environment?
Indeed, the venue of the COP has been shifted to Montreal, Canada, and Montreal, Canada, because Canada is the host of the seat of the Secretariat. And that's why then, logically, the Conference of the Party has been moved there. But it was agreed from the beginning by the parties themselves that government of China, who is the president of the Conference of the Parties, continue to play that leadership role also to COP15 and beyond. We also know that China has done a lot in terms of, I will say, biodiversity conservation, particularly at national level. Few examples. With the Aichi biodiversity targets, protected areas, for instance, the target was 17% land or terrestrial ecosystem and 10% marine ecosystem. As of now, we are just about to reach the 17% target, and this is after 2 years of the deadline of 2020, and also about equally, but few more percentages to be covered to reach the marine areas. But China had already expanded its protected areas to 25% even before 2020, well beyond the global target. Let's look at pandas. Panda had gone to extinction at one time in China. As we speak, they have recovered the panda and a number of other species that now you visit China, you can see them, that species have recovered and even almost being removed from the IUCN red list of species threatened with extinction. We have seen China also expanding their red hills, red conservation areas, also created many other new, in the different provinces, national parks for wildlife management. We have seen with the emergence of the COVID pandemic, how China went very fast to review its wildlife legislation and adopt a new wildlife legislation to provide solutions to reducing the contacts between animals and human beings, which it is believed could be one of the reasons why we ended up with COVID. So indeed, China is taking a lot of steps. And in fact, the theme of the Conference of the Parties is ecological civilization, shared our common future for all life on Earth. And ecological civilization has actually been a principle by the government of China, which in actual sense is actually effective management and protection of the environment, biodiversity being one. So those are few examples where our leader, President of COP, is already showing or walking the talk.
Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.